So welcome everyone to our topic rounds with Dr. Morgan Cornelius. This is Kudu and the Disease Party. Um, in this presentation, Dr. Cornelius is going to talk about the disease outbreak of the African species of antelope, kudu, focusing specifically on anthrax and rabies. So Dr. Cornelius is a native of Oakland, California, West Coast, best coast. He attended North Carolina A&T for undergrad and is back home in Oakland working as an associate veterinarian at a mixed small animal practice, as well as for the zoo and as a volunteer zoo veterinarian. Dr. Cornelius has worked in Oakland, Los Angeles, and national zoos, as well as with wildlife veterinarians in South Africa. He's also a part of the National Association of Black Scuba Divers, which we did learn during one of our IG Live sessions, and everyone thought that was really cool. And he's a part of the American Association of Zoo Veterinarians and Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, and then is also a world advocate for autism. So truly a well-rounded guy. We're so happy to have him here sharing his expertise with us and talking about kudu. So I will turn it over to Dr. Cornelius.
Hey, can everybody hear me? Okay, cool. So yeah, I'm gonna talk to you about kudu. They're actually one of my favorite animals. I use a lot of analogies because some of this stuff can be kind of confusing. So I'm gonna use some analogies to kind of simplify this for everybody and make it really interesting for you guys. Hopefully, I can keep you guys entertained while we learn about kudu and anthrax and rabies that they appear to be very highly susceptible to. So gonna get ready to get started for you guys. Bear with me. I'm not really that technology savvy. So I share my screen. Okay. Everybody can see that generally. All right. And all right, let's go, everybody. So we're going to talk about kudu and the disease party. I am Dr. Morgan Cornelius. So looking at you guys straight ahead right now is a male kudu. I kind of call them like the sex symbols of the animal world. I mean, just, look at that guy. He's handsome. So we're going to start off with what is a kudu? So kudu comes from the Kakoi name for the antelope. There are actually two species of kudu. So there consist of the lesser kudu and the greater kudu. So there are woodland antelope that's found throughout eastern and southern Africa. Lesser kudus you're going to find more in your acacia thorn bushes and kind of like arid savannas that really like thickets. And you're going to find your greater kudu more in your woodlands and bushlands, more in like your open areas. So this is a picture of kudu. So this is the lesser kudu to your left. This is the greater kudu to your right, to give you kind of like an example of size differences and kind of like what they look like. We're going to start off with the lesser kudu. So they're native to East Africa. And as I said, they're found in your acacia thorn bushes, your arid savannas, relying on those thickets for security. They weigh around 130 pounds for females and about 230 for males, and stand about 35 to about 40 inches at the shoulder. The lesser kudu is going to have a white patch on its front with a white stripe that runs down its back and about 11 to 14 stripes that kind of come down off of it. And they have spiral horns, as you're going to see in both species. Lifespans about 10 to 15 years in the wild, with it being about 20 years in captivity. And most animals that are wild animals, once you see them in captivity, are going to live longer because they don't have predators or diseases like that you would see in the wild. Your greater kudu is going to be native to your woodlands and your bushlands of East and Southern Africa. Your greater kudu is going to be about 260 pounds for females. Males are around 700 pounds. And they're going to stand anywhere at the shoulder from females about 4.5 feet to males that are about a little over 6 feet. And then they're also going to have these spiral horns that you can see in this guy, which are about 6 feet long. The greater kudu doesn't have the white stripe that runs down its back that you're going to see in your lesser kudu. They have a chevron, which is going to be kind of like that white area that you see in between their eyes. And they're going to have kind of like a mane on their neck and a tuft of hair going down their back. Their lifespan is about 7 to 8 years in the wild, and about 23 years you're going to see in captivity. And this is giving you guys a little bit about just kind of like some of the differences. So one of the main things is obviously going to be your size and weight. The horns in the lesser kudu are going to be smaller. You're going to see their environments are going to vary differently. Like lesser kudu are very shy, so they don't like to be in very open areas. Greater kudu are going to be in more of your open woodlands, and you're not going to see greater kudu in those woodland areas because of those large horns that they have. And when you have horns like that and just trying to get through thick bush and thick trees, it's very easy for those horns to get tangled up and caught in those bushes. Lesser kudu are also more dependent on water from their food, so they're not going to be at a lot of watering holes, and you're going to see greater kudu more at your watering holes. So their behavior. So kudu are actually browsers, and what that means is they like to eat bushes, trees, leaves, things like that, flowering plants, as opposed to your grazers. And a grazer is going to be like zebras. They have those wide mouths that are like lawnmowers, and they put their face close to the grass and they kind of just munch the grass. So that's how one of the things you can ways you can always usually tell a browser from a grazer is the wide muzzles. So white rhinos, wildebeest, zebra, grazers, and the animals that have like the prehensile lips are going to be those that are going to eat those bushes and those thickets like kudu. So the females are usually in small groups, about 2 to 3, with the males being solitary, kind of coming together when there's time to mate. Territorial behavior is pretty much non-existent with them. Dominance displays are handled very quickly, usually through displays of who has the longer horns. Sometimes it'll get to the point where they actually do end up fighting, and the problem they have with that is because they have these spiral horns, a lot of times these horns can get interlocked, and they end up starving to death and dying. And they have very small home ranges for African animals. It's only about 136 to about 1,500 acres. So the reproduction, males usually leave the herd about 1.5 years of age. Mating season is around the rainy season when the babies are born. So that's about February to March. Gestation is about 6 to 8 months, one calf being born, sometimes two, which is very rare. Females usually leave their groups to give birth and keep their babies kind of like in dense woodland areas and bushes for about 4 to 5 weeks before coming back to the herd. And they're weaned at about 6 months of age, and they're completely independent of their mothers at that point in time. So some of the challenges you're going to face as a kudu, one of the main ones is going to be agriculture. So because they like these woodland areas and as agriculture grows, they find that they're now competing with people with their livestock. So their areas are being destroyed for farmland, areas for livestock. As you can see to your bottom left, they are a trophy animal. So kudu, especially in Namibia, bring in 31 million US dollars in ecotourism, trophy hunters. A lot of hunters come to hunt these animals just for their horns. And depending on the size of the horns, these animals, it can range for one kudu to pay to hunt it like $1 to $5 million. They also have predators such as lions, hyenas, and your wild dogs that they have to worry about. So one of the cool things I'm about to show you guys, there's a kind of like a contest called Book Droll in South Africa that I'm going to show you guys a video of. And what they do is they actually take the feces of the kudu and they put it in their mouth, and they have this contest to who can spit it out the farthest. And it's a big thing in South Africa that they do. It's apparently very popular. They have whole competitions about it. So when I was in South Africa, the guide actually demonstrated that. So I'm going to show you guys that.
Somebody count to 3.
1, 2, 3.
Wow, you really just put that in your mouth and spit it? Yes. I'll do another one. Okay. Let it soak. Count to 3.
1, 2, 3.
Wow.
But how does it taste?
Glass.
And actually, that was some kudu dung that we found just out there. Like, we didn't see the kudu nor it was, and he just put it in his mouth. So kudu actually, their sounds and vocalizations are more kind of like barks, kind of like a rumble, not necessarily like a bark like a dog. And their horns are also used as a shofar, which is a horn used for religious ceremony, for Jewish religious ceremonies. That's one of the very popular things their horns are actually used for. So now for the disease party. And this is the party of them all, anthrax. So what is anthrax for you guys? So anthrax is caused by gram-positive spore-forming rod-shaped bacteria. Anthrax is a zoonotic disease. And for those of you that don't know what a zoonotic disease is, it's basically a disease that can be transmitted from animals to humans and also vice versa. And it affects livestock, your wildlife, and humans in a lot of developing countries, but we also do see cases in the United States. The reservoirs are going to be your grass eating animals. And it's resistant to extreme conditions like heat, drought, radiation, chemicals, which makes it very hard to kind of combat it when you have your outbreaks of it. And they're even finding that in areas where the temperature drops very cold, that once the temperature raises back up and there's no more snow, that those spores can actually still be infective. And we're finding that the spores of anthrax, can live in the soil that it's inoculated from decades to even we're thinking hundreds of years, which makes it something really, really dangerous and something that's really, really hard to combat. So your mode of transmission. So I'm gonna give you guys like this is don't mind the zebra. This is just a figure that I got to kind of show you guys what kind of like how anthrax works. So due to hemorrhaging and bodily fluids, once an animal dies, it then inoculates the soil. So it gets into the soil, and we're finding that it kind of has like a parasitic symbiotic relationship with the grasses in that area. So for established grass, we're seeing that it helps the grass establish 50% more. And with seedlings, we're finding that the grass grows 45% higher than it would normally grow. So then you have your animals that come in, they eat it, and the process starts all over again. So an analogy of this is if you guys ever seen the movie The Hangover, so there's a meme and it has Mr. Chow, and he says like, "But did you die?" And so that's what Anthrax is. Anthrax wants to come to the party, and he's like, "Oh, I'm having a good time." Like, "But did you die?" And everyone's like, "Yes, I did die. Like, you're killing me." But Anthrax doesn't want the party to stop. So Anthrax is like, "Okay, you know what? I've killed you, but I have to make a few moves and figure out how I can keep this party going. So let me drop into the soil." And we're seeing that he has like a parasitic almost relationship with the grass and the soil. And they were initially thinking that, oh, well, how can anthrax survive in the soil? Because it's probably competing with the other bacteria that are going to destroy it. But this guy's hardy, and he's like, "Oh no, this is not happening. I want to keep this party going. I want to meet more animals that I can kill and party with, and I want to just keep this as a chain going." So when the grass starts growing higher, it's kind of like a system overload to other animals because it's like, whoa, the grass is really green. It's growing. I need this. Like, I'm going to eat this stuff. And Anthrax is back at it again, starting his party all up all over again. And so what we realized, this is actually a test that was done to where the ground was actually inoculated with anthrax in these little circles. And we had controls to where there was no anthrax in the ground. And as you can see, the areas where anthrax was actually inoculated, the grass is growing fuller, it's growing taller. And we're thinking that's how it's able to keep its disease going. It's able to infect more and more animals and pretty much stay in the environment. And we're also starting to realize that this may have been an evolutionary thing because we're seeing outbreaks. And with the outbreaks, there was one in 2000 that in Kruger National Park killed pretty much all 400 of the kudu in the area. And so we're thinking this could be an evolutionary thing to where anthrax has now associated itself with the environment and the grass to help itself keep going. So this is just giving you guys a diagram of the different routes that animals can get anthrax. And I want you guys to really pay attention to this red circle here. I'm going to come back to that. So as an animal dies and the spores are now in the blood and body fluids and everything, you have your scavengers. And your scavengers can get it from, they're eating the tissues and things like that. But we're also realizing that a lot of carnivores aren't necessarily as susceptible to it because it takes a lot more of the spores to actually infect the carnivores than it would your herbivores. And you have your people. The thing about kudu is they get a paracutiform of anthrax to where the animals sometimes die before there are any clinical signs. So you're finding that people will then kill these animals. They eat the tissue. It's not properly cooked. And then they get an intestinal form of it. You have your vultures. What they do is, they're eating the carcasses that have the anthrax in them. And we're seeing that birds aren't really as susceptible to this, if susceptible at all. And they then go to these watering holes where they're regurgitating some of the tissue, some of the blood. They're cleaning themselves off. And you have animals that are now coming to these watering holes that are actually getting infected with the spores of anthrax. So now back to this red circle here. So these are going to represent your blue flies. So what happens is they then get into the carcass, they ingest the bodily fluid, and they then land on these leaves. And when they're on the leaves, they're defecating, they're releasing the fluids that are contaminated with bacilli from the anthrax, and then you have your kudu. These leaves are the kudu's favorite food. So the kudu are coming, they're eating these leaves that the bot flies have pretty much defecated on. They, put bodily fluids on, and now the kudu are being infected with anthrax bacilli. And because they get the paraQ form, it rapidly just turns over in their body. So the virulence factor. So remember, I told you guys that anthrax is the guy that just wants to party, 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 and never wants the party to stop. So he's able to do that with a couple of things. He has a polyglutamic acid capsule, which is antiphagocytic. And antiphagocytic means we have white blood cells in our body, which kind of help us and protect us from bacteria infections. So antiphagocytic means he's not affected by these white blood cells, and kind of like their antiphagocytic prevents these white bloods from actually coming and destroying him. And there's the anthrax toxin, which is a tripartite protein toxin. And like I said, he's the guy that just wants to party, but anthrax can't actually get into the body by himself. So he needs help from his entourage, as I like to call it. His entourage consists of the protective antigen, the edema factor, and the lethal factor. So we're going to start with your protective antigen. So that's pretty much their transport to the target cell, because edema factor and lethal factor are pretty much non-factors by themselves. They need somebody to get them in so they can, do their thing. So when they team up with the protective antigen, they can then get in and they can start causing a lot of problems and issues. So your edema factor basically happens when cyclic AMP is in overproduction from the bacilli. So it causes an increased permeability to water and ions, which then causes the edema, which is notable for anthrax. So this is kind of an overview of like the pathway that anthrax takes. And like I said, anthrax can't get into the party with itself. So he's using his entourage. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to get to this party one way or another. You're not going to stop me. So he uses the protective antigen to kind of be like, a Trojan horse. And this shows like how insidious he is. So he uses himself as a Trojan horse and attaches to this guy, a pointer. But if you can see where it says PA in the first one and it says CMG2 is a receptor. So he attaches to the receptor and he rides along. He's going through the front door. He's going through, security and everything. And proteases, which are things that help cleave proteins, cleaves off a piece of your PA, which is your protective antigen. So basically what that does is it allows EF and your lethal factor to attach on to him. And it's like, y'all, we in here now. We in the party. Like, y'all come with me. It's all good. So then he pairs up with all the other PAs. And what happens is they use this, it kind of fools the cell membrane, and your cell membrane is what helps protect the cell from anything getting in. But because they latched onto these receptors and they fooled these receptors, they're then able to drop down in, and you can see these guys kind of paired up and drawing in. It looks like this teardrop here. It produces an endospore, which is kind of like a little bubble. So while they're in there, they're able to like travel. And in this endospore, the LF and the EF actually go through a physical change. So it's kind of like, hey, we're in the party now. But this is just kind of like, okay, they're like, nah, we got to go to VIP now. So what they do is they cause cellular changes, which causes, if you can see down to your left, it's kind of like a green barrel shaped tube. So they cause this kind of like funnel that now allows them directly into the cell, and they're attacking your macrophages. That is the cell, like their target cell. So that's like the VIP where you want to go. So once the lethal factor and your edema factor drop in through this hole, and now they're in VIP, anthrax, he's going. He's in this party raging. He's like, hey, I need 2 bottles of edema. Where the hemorrhage girls at? He's like, let's turn the heat up in here, the temperature, and he's running amok in here. He's having the time of his life at this party now. And that's how the cycle continues to go. And he's just raging, raging, raging. And because they get this paracute form of anthrax, kudu, in within 2 hours, you're seeing them just croaking over. And it's like he out partied them in a sense. So your clinical signs are going to be your staggering, dyspnea, which is going to be, difficulty breathing. You'll see trembling and collapse, convulsions, the stereotypical edema, which is one of the big signs of anthrax, and then sudden death. And then you're going to see bloody discharge from your natural opening. So they'll bleed from their nose, their mouth, their anus. So with a disease like this, you're also going to see opisthotonus, which is, as you can see in this kudu, the head is kind of like curled back as one of the telltale signs as well. With this, if you ever see an animal that is bleeding out of its orifices and it's uncoagulated blood, it's like it's continuously running, you do not want to do a necropsy. You do not want to touch it. You're supposed to call the authorities for that, because this is highly, highly, highly contagious, and it can aerosol. It gets into, cutaneous lesions and things like that. And the problem is, even with things like, they say, oh, burn the carcass, but the problem is you burn it, it aerosolizes. And especially they were finding in areas that were downwind, these spores were now hitting the wind when you burn it and were infecting other areas. And you want to make sure, like, even when you are called in, if you're working for like a CDC or you're working for the state health, that you want to make sure you have your PPE on when you're dealing with something like this, because it is very, very, very dangerous. So as I was telling you guys about the outbreak situation, so there was a massive outbreak in wildlife parks in Zimbabwe, and from August to November 2004, resulted in the death of 500 kudu. And to that area, that was a big hit for them, because kudu bring in so much money to the area, especially for, like I said, wildlife tourism, trophy hunting, even the meat is a really big thing for them. So they were trying to get a hold of it, but because this is such a hard thing when you have an outbreak of it, and you're in an area to where you don't have as many techniques for testing or trying to contain it as we do, it just overwhelms the population. So susceptibility, as I said, the feeding habits of kudu. When you have blue flies dropping, as you can see here, feces and fluids from carcasses that are contaminated, kudu, they're just going to eat. Their mind is just working on eat, 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 eat. So they're indiscriminate eaters, which means they're kind of going to pretty much eat anything in that area that is going to be within their height reach. And it's very easy for them to become infected with this disease. And because the peracute form, because it hits their body so hard and within 2 hours, everything just kind of explodes, it makes them extremely susceptible to this. Treatment. So there's not really a treatment for this, for kudu. And because, like I said, a lot of times the peracute form, they die within 2 hours. A lot of animals die before you even see the clinical signs. But we're also finding too that, in high prize animals, you kind of treat this systematically. You want to hit it with a lot of antibiotics, but even that kind of really doesn't do anything, because you're trying to stop hemorrhaging, you're trying to stop edema, and it's a really hard thing to do because this pretty much tears through the system so quickly. There is I think it's a kind of like a vaccine human wise that's called Biothrax, because this is something that the world has kind of been looking at, because they are seeing that it's also being used in bioenvironmental terrorism. So it's kind of something that we're also looking at with that too. So Biothrax has been one of those things that sometimes works, sometimes kind of doesn't work. So there's still a lot of resources trying to go into trying to figure out how we can actually combat this and control it, contain it, and even stop it. Next, we're going to move on to rabies. So what is rabies? So rabies is a viral zoonotic neuroinvasive disease which causes inflammation in the brain. It's a single-stranded RNA virus of the genus Lyssavirus in the family Rhabdoviridae, and it's primarily a disease of mammals. So you're not going to see this in, your reptiles or fish or birds or anything like that. Transmission. So your transmission can be through bites from infected animals, scratches, and infected saliva, which is going to make contact with your mucous membranes in open wounds. This guy is giving you just kind of like a little bit of a pathway of what happens with rabies. So animal is bit by an infected animal. The virus is going to enter the body through your transdermal inoculation or direct contact with your infectious mucosal saliva. Through the lesion, it's going to be through your mucous membranes. It then travels up your central nervous system, and then it's going to affect like your brain, and then the cycle kind of like goes all over again. So your stages. So you're going to have your prodromal stage, which is usually a 1 to 3 day period, which is characterized by behavioral changes. And we see this in kudu. They start to notice that the animals go into, heavily populated areas with humans, which is very unheard of for them because they're very shy animals, and they usually try and stay away from populated areas. You don't really see the aggression that you would see in other animals, especially, if we're talking about like your dogs. Your excitation stage, or as they call it, the fear stage, and that's 3 to 4 days. It's going to affect the animal's hyperactivity, so the external stimuli. They bite at anything that's near. We find that some animals also will have a fear of water. And the paralytic or your dumb stage is going to be caused by damage to the motor neurons. Another thing that we see with kudu is they'll leave their social groups. And for herbivore, that's very strange because you have a lot of predators. So you're not going to see animals that are normally going to leave their groups that are going to provide protection. So when you start to see the animal going away from its herd, that's one of the telltale signs of kudu that we're seeing, is that they're secluding themselves, and it starts to put it on our radar that, okay, does this animal have rabies, or is this something that we need to be taking a look at? So the Kudu epidemic, the first epidemic that lasted from 1977 to about 1983 in Namibia, and it was estimated about 50,000 Kudu, which is about 20% of their population, were succumbed to rabies. And in the following years, only isolated sporadic outbreaks were reported in Kudu until about 2002, when there was another sharp increase that was noted. So one of the things that they're trying to figure out is what is, making them susceptible to it, and why are they so susceptible. So what we're finding, is that we're thinking there has actually become a kudu strain of rabies. And we're kind of trying to study that because we're thinking that this is something that has actually jumped species now. One of the main ways in Africa that animals get rabies are from jackals. So they're one of the big reservoirs for that. Just like in the United States, depending on the regions you have, for us, it might be raccoons or skunks, possums. But in Africa, jackal is one of the main reservoirs for rabies. Because these guys live in these groups, what we're thinking is, they're getting it through possibly jackal bites, but because these animals are very fast, it's very rare that a carnivore is going to be able to like catch them. Very nimble, very quick. They can jump around bushes and things like that. So we're thinking that there's a small case possibly from jackal bites or things like that. But what we're thinking is it's starting with infected kudu. And because they eat these bushes and trees, they get a lot of lesions in their mouth, and they like acacia, which has thorns on it. But they have really thick, like gums and things like that, and dental pads. So from them eating these bushes and these twigs, it's opening up lesions in their mouth. When an infected animal with rabies is eating these bushes, it's putting that infected saliva on these bushes, and they hang in very close groups, and they come behind each other. So they're eating these bushes with this infected mucosal secretions, and they're now becoming infected. We're also thinking it's happened doing mutual grooming. So it's very common for these animals to groom their calves, or groom themselves, groom each other. And in this grooming, they may lick these open lesions. So we're thinking that's how they're passing it between each other. And we're finding that once we are actually kind of, taking the secretions, and we're studying it a little bit, and we're running samples, we're finding that they have a certain strain that is becoming specific to them. And it's not one of those things to where a dog bites another dog and they get it, or a dog is bitten by a raccoon. We're finding that they're passing it horizontally between each other. So they're not even passing it through species. And with evolution and things like that, we're thinking that the rabies is starting to mutate specifically to them. And because it's starting to mutate towards them, it's hitting them so hard and just destroying entire populations of them. And they're going down very quickly with it. So treatment. So it's really hard to treat antelope as you would like your dog and cat, because these animals are in a large area. They're in areas that is very hard to get to. And it's hard to inoculate them like we would do with a dog and cat, because again, they're skittish and you have to be very far away and shoot them with a vaccine. What they're thinking about doing, and they're doing a little bit of testing with is trying to actually do it in a bait form, putting it in water, putting a vaccine in like food or pellets and everything. And that works a little bit better when you're on a reserve, like a game reserve or a trophy hunting reserve, and you can do that. But when you're in some places like a large national park like Kruger or Serengeti National Park, it's almost impossible to do that. So now a lot of the research is pretty much going into just trying to study this form of rabies. What's the best way to combat it? How is it exactly affecting these animals? Are we seeing it jumping from kudu to other antelope species and other animals? So a lot of it right now is kind of just trying to do the research. But the problem is there isn't a lot of research on it, and a lot of people aren't doing research until we see these outbreaks and we see these problems. And by that time, it's too late, and you've got this enormous outbreak, and you're too far gone with it. So it's very imperative that we have like our scientists going out there and just our field workers and researchers. When they see something, we try and get to it as soon as we possibly can. So prevention, as I said, oral vaccine, IM vaccine, which is, again, like I said, going to be very hard in animals because these are wild animals as opposed to your animals that are in reserves or your animals that are in your more so farm areas. Oh yeah. So yeah, that is it for this was something else different, but so that is it for my disease party. If anybody has any questions or anything, hopefully I entertained y'all. Get y'all locked in.
Thank you for that.
Oh, yeah.
I know I definitely have questions to ask, but I will wait and see if anyone else has questions.
How long can a disease survive in like the environment?
So, good question. So anywhere from years, decades to what we're seeing is centuries. Definitely decades because I know they were finding like carcasses of animals that have been buried in especially tundra areas where it's a lot of snow, and the carcass has been buried 60 years, and once they brought it up, the spores reactivated. So that's what makes it so hard is it literally we're seeing that it's lasting in the environment for a really long time. And at first they were thinking that, well, anthrax can survive in the body for long periods of time, or outside of the body for long periods of time. And initially they were thinking, well, it needs the blood to be able to survive and inoculate the ground. But they were realizing, no, just the spores, can inoculate the ground, or just the fluid. So we're seeing that it's decades. It can be decades. It can be hundreds of years. So that's one of the big problems, and it stays in that ground area. So if you're developing on there and you've got your tractors and you're digging up that dirt, you're now inoculating all of the construction workers and everybody in that area, and you didn't even know it.
Thank you.
I know anthrax, they were trying to find a correlation between your like vultures and your carcass eating animals and anthrax, knowing that I guess they had potentially like something that could remove it without them actually being inoculated by it. Have you seen any correlations with that?
So with the vultures, I know there was a lot of talk about they were trying to figure out why they didn't get it, and I think it's potentially one of the things they're thinking is because it more so kind of like affects mammals. Another thing too I was reading is saying that because a lot of vultures, like when you see around their head and their neck, it's skin. They don't have a lot of feathers around there, so it keeps things from attaching to their face, which could potentially become infectious as well. With the carnivores, what they're thinking is it's more so a susceptibility issue with them. So it takes so much more of the toxin to affect them. They're thinking that they're not really susceptible of it. And we're also noticing too that like pigs aren't really susceptible to it. So it's certain animals like the strain, because there's also different strains of anthrax. So there's a cutaneous form, there's a GI form, and a respiratory form. So we're seeing with cows that they're getting more of the GI form. So you're going to see like the hemorrhaging and the edema and things like that. the respiratory form, which is one of the bad things that you see in humans, and that has like an 80%, I want to say, fatality rate, because it just destroys the lungs. And then the cutaneous form, I think, has like maybe like a 20% fatality rate. And you're going to see what are called eschars, which are going to be like black sores on the cutaneous areas of the skin. So it's one of those things to where it kind of varies based on uh, what form affects the animal more, how much of it they get. And I think with carnivores, and especially like the vultures, they're thinking that maybe they spread it based in terms of you're spreading the carcass. So if grab the zebra's leg and you go maybe a mile down, that area then becomes inoculated. Or birds, like I said, flying and they're now in watering holes and they're regurgitating the meat that has the spores, or droplets of body fluid and things like that. So that's more so kind of like the spread. And then kind of like them not getting it is more so like a susceptibility thing.
Interesting. Thanks.
Okay, I'm gonna ask my question. I don't know if anyone else has questions, but so my question is more so about rabies. And I thought it was really interesting when you were talking about how basically this like kudu to kudu transmission for rabies, which I feel like we don't see a lot in rabies. You'll get bites, right? Like from animal to animal, but it's almost like really rare, to see like a group, like this outbreak in a group of, with rabies. And so I was wondering if you guys had ever thought about a reservoir, like does South Africa or like that area have maybe a reservoir that is like a carrier for rabies, kind of like how raccoons or mythically possums, which I think that myth has been debunked that they don't carry rabies, but like some animal that can have it and be kind of spreading it seemingly between them. Was there ever anything like that?
So in Africa, jackals are actually the reservoir. So that's how the majority of rabies is spread in Africa, is through the jackals.
Mm-hmm.
But with the kudu, they're thinking that they are their own reservoir.
Okay.
And so, I think I was saying like it's kind of hard for a jackal. Number one, is way too small to take down a kudu. So if it bites, it's like a nip or something like that. So that's probably something to where it's going to start there. That's probably like if you go down the line of where this actually came from, it started with probably like a jackal nipping at a kudu's leg or something, it kicking up, running or something like that.
Yeah.
But they become their own reservoir for it now. And it's one of those things to where, I'm pretty sure everybody here knows that like these are antelope species, so they don't have any incisors and everything. They got that dental pad thing, so it's not like they're biting each other, and they're not an aggressive animal like how zebras are, where they're biting and kicking and things like that. And so for them, they kind of really don't have a choice but to pass it between amongst each other, and it's more so from the mucosal secretion. So I think all of us kind of learned that rabies is from a bite. And I think we focus in our mind so much that all we think is bite, 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 and that's how you're getting that. But I think doing some of the research I did, it's making me realize that it might not necessarily be the bite. It may be the bite that is then injecting the secretions, into these mucous membranes, because we're seeing we have an animal that isn't biting. We have an animal that is, secreting, the saliva that has rabies in it, and is infecting each other. Mm-hmm. And with open lesions, I think is one of the main things is that, like I said, they're eating leaves, and it's kind of like what am I thinking of? Like lumpy jaw. How the lesions, it opens up lesions, and that's how they're getting this, or like like a wooden tongue type thing. So they're eating these leaves, it's causing these lesions, and the saliva is still stuck on these plants, and so they're just passing it back and forth between each other. And rabies is kind of saying like, well, we're not really being passed, through a bite or to other animals. We're staying in this population. And so, you start to adapt and you start to change, and you start to specifically, kind of evolve yourself to stay in this population so that you can stay where you are. So we're seeing that, you know, they're kind of their own reservoir, and the problem with that is they're destroying themselves. And because of these groups they live in, and they're very small groups, it's easy for a whole herd to be taken out, and they're taking themselves out. And then you're inoculating your babies because you're licking your babies, and you know you're licking each other in these wounds. And so, you know, we were looking at the, you know, I'll say dog form because there's not really like a dog form of rabies, but
Yeah.
you know, and we're noticing it's we're seeing the differences in just how it affects the animal and just kind of like how it works and even how it's looking on a microscope. We're seeing that it's evolving just for this specific animal.
Yeah. And that is a big indicator, right? Like if they have their own strain, that it's being passed amongst them. So
Yeah. And we're just finding that kudu are one of those kind of like indicator animals because they're so susceptible to everything. So when you see them come down with something so quick, it's like one of those, hey, we need to figure out what this is right now because it spreads quickly with them, it kills them quickly. And I think the problem with an animal that something kills them really quickly is it can kill them before you see those clinical signs. You know, and you can be handling it or dealing with it and not even realize it has it. It drops dead, and then you just, you know, you see an outbreak.
exactly. No, that makes sense. Thank you for answering that.
So I have a question. Has there been any effect with the loss of habitat because of agriculture or just, I guess, humans like building their homes? Like, has there been any effect of like concentrating the outbreaks because of a loss of habitat?
Yeah. So what they were seeing with, I'm glad you asked me that too. One of the things that they're seeing is with the concentration of habitat, it was causing a lot of, and this is with uh, more so rabies, a little bit with like the anthrax too. They were seeing that it was kind of keeping it contained in one area. Because again, you know, you're tearing down this area where they're eating and they're in such a small population. So it kind of was keeping everything contained. Problem with the kind of like the anthrax, because it was in the ground, you were finding that they were digging everything back up. So it was causing in a lot of these rural areas where they're moving out, and especially in Africa, where you know things are getting more developed in Africa. And so places where people weren't normally living, they're now living now, and you're building stuff there, and you're finding a lot of outbreaks in what's now being like the suburbs or city areas, because that's not where they were normally living before. And with rabies, you know, it's kind of like being contained, and it was kind of one of those things to where, well, we developed all this area where they used to live, and there was such a small population, they killed each other out. So it's keeping it contained there. And so they were seeing that in a lot of different pockets to where there were areas of agriculture and development, because there was such a small population, it was keeping it contained in those areas. But areas where that wasn't happening, you were seeing a continuous spread of it.
Interesting. Thank you.
You might have said this at the beginning and I just missed it, but what are you doing now? Like, are you?
So I am back in Oakland, California. So I'm at a mixed animal clinic, and then volunteer at the zoo and everything, because zoo medicine is really hard to get into. So I would suggest anybody that wants to do like zoo wildlife. You're gonna do a lot of free work, and it's a lot of networking. And I think just in veterinary medicine in general, I think it's very much in networking. And especially with our people being in zoo and wildlife, there's only 2 Black zoo vets in the country. There's Dr. Jordan Davis Powell. She's at the LA Zoo, and then there's a guy at SeaWorld. But there are people who are in our field that just may not be in veterinary medicine. Like Ms. Denise Verrett, she is the only Black woman zoo director in the country, and she's at the LA Zoo. Great person, great contact for I think just anybody to have, and whether you want to do zoo medicine or not. The director of the Atlanta Aquarium is a Black man, and they actually the AZA, which is the American Zoological Association, they do their conference every year, and they actually have a minority summit. And Ms. Denise Verrett actually spoke at the last one they just had, which was, you know, via Zoom and everything. So, you know, we're out there in those fields. I think we need to be more there, because I always say this. I think one of the things that I think is kind of like holding us back is that yes, there's a small population of minority, especially Black vets. And I think we get into the veterinary medicine field and it's like, I'm here, cool. It's like, because it's such a small population, I think we think this is kind of like the mountaintop just getting there, and that's not good enough. It's like our counterparts are doing these procedures that are, it's the only one that's been done. They're writing these papers, they're writing the books, they're coming up with the questions on the NAVLE, they're speaking at these conferences. And it's like, of course they're not going to take us serious because we're thinking that like it's just cool just to be a vet. Like we need to be doing that research. We need to be getting into those fields that we don't see a lot of us in. We need to be speaking at the conferences, writing those papers, and we need to be the ones that are pushing the field forward. And also nepotism too. It's like when we're in there, it's like, hey, I'm in zoo medicine, I'm bringing everybody else with me. It's like that's what everybody else does. It's like we think that we have to work so hard and we just have to, slave, and we have to do it all on our own. No, we got to start really helping each other and pulling each other through and pulling each other forward. And hey, I got some notes for you. You use this. Like, come on, let's go through. Because I don't want to be the only person in zoo medicine. Like, I want to be able to call somebody and be like, hey, my counterpart that looks like me. And I think Kamala Harris said it best to all those little girls. She said, I might be the first Black woman vice president, but I will not be the last. And that was real. Like, I connected with that because it's like, come on, like, I don't want to be the only zoo vet, or this person shouldn't be the only Black cardiologist. It's like, we need our circles and we need each other to bring us in here to guide us and pull us back. And it's not about, I think, anymore slaving and we gotta struggle and this and that. Like, nah, forget all that. Because so many other people aren't doing that. We really gotta bond together. And I think we've got to start building this village, like really building this village. And it's like, hey, I do zoo medicine, lab animals not my thing, but I got 2 people I can put you in contact with, or I got this person or this internship, or I can connect you with somebody, and I think I learned that kind of like in vet school, and I think I'm learning that a lot more now. It's just we can't be the crabs in the barrel, and
Exactly.
and it's like if everyone wants a seat at the table, let's make our own table.
Hey, oh my gosh, you were just preaching. I'm about to like.
But I truly believe this. Like I truly believe it. Like it's and
start running around my apartment. I'm not even kidding.
And two, at the same time, it's kind of like I said, it can't just be for us to be good enough to just be, oh, we're vets now. It's like you want to be at this table, but you're not bringing anything. What are you bringing to us? You're just a vet. That like no, that's not okay.
It's funny that you're saying all this because I think it's so true. Number one, and of course I have opinions on this, so I won't like take up a ton of time. But that was what I noticed, and that's what I want for Black DVM Network. I want this type of connectivity so that we know each other, right? That we don't just know like the people's names, like the famous people's names, the people that we see all the time. Like we all need to know each other and know what we're trying to do and help each other get to the places that we want to go. And speaking of, advancing medicine, that is a huge pillar of Black DVM Networks, because I'm not going to say that we're wasting our time, but we spend a lot of time talking about diversity. And, we get so caught up in all of these other areas that are just not vet med, right? And we can be so great inside of vet med. We don't have to always talk about diversity and inclusion. And, we kind of get tagged for those types of talks and to kind of advance in that area and make ourselves known on the diversity front. And so, yes, Black DVM Network loves supporting medicine, which is why, we're one of the first groups as far as underrepresented minority population groups goes that tries to incorporate medicine into everything, right? Like we're not just only talking about being, a Black veterinarian only, even though that's truly part of our story. That's who we are. But it's so true. And so hopefully we can bring together those tools to help people get to those places, get to those conferences. I'll put in a little plug for the foundation that we've been developing, and it's really going to provide financial assistance and support, not only to veterinary students, but also to veterinarians that want to go to conferences, right? You don't get that AVMA grant, come to Black DVM Network. We will give you the money to get there if you need it. So we're also really excited about that. And yeah, just like snaps, like preach, like won't you do it, like all the things to what you just said, because I wholeheartedly believe them all.
what you're doing is very neat. Like I think this is a great organization. It's actually the only one that I can think of that I kind of like know that is doing stuff like this. And I think it's a very great thing. And it runs the gamut. It's like from elementary and high school up until even after you graduated vet school and everything. And I just think, like I said, it's a network. And I think what you're doing is very much a network that we need. And just like you said, the medicine is very important. And to you guys that are in vet school, definitely keep going. I think I realized one of those things after graduating recently and looking for a job is the best thing I tell you guys is know your worth. And they are going to lowball you when you come out, and you gotta know your worth. And it's one of those things that I don't think I was taught in vet school was how to negotiate a job and how to negotiate like the contracts and things like that. And it was kind of like touch and go. And I definitely figured it out. And the main thing is know your worth, because they'll tell you when you say like, hey, this is what I'm looking for. It's, well, oh, where are we gonna? I don't know if we can. We have this money, or I don't know if we have these resources for this and that. And then they start to meet you, and be your organic self. And I tell people this all the time is when you're talking about veterinary medicine, like I love animals. Like I live for this. Like I would do this for free. Like I truly, truly love animals because every single day is the best day of my life. Like with wildlife, even bad days. I really, really love it. And when you're genuine about that, people can feel that. They can sense that. It's not like it's rehearsed or anything like that. And when you're in the interviewing process, they'll understand that and they'll feel that. And all of a sudden, they found all this money and they found all these resources, and they're giving you everything you need, and they're trying to relocate you. And it's like, oh, well, I thought you guys didn't have that. So my main thing is definitely know your worth, and know your worth is also your work ethic. If they say, well, you're coming out of school, well, I know I want to do this. I know I want to do that. I know I want to do the CE classes. I want to be good in orthopedics. I want to be good in surgery. Like I know I'm going to work, so that's a part of my worth. Don't just think because I'm coming out of school, that I shouldn't get what I'm worth. And especially for us as Black people, know your worth. You definitely you gotta know your worth. You gotta know what you're capable of is what your work ethic is too, and where you want to go with it. And you need to tell them like, hey, you know, I need mentoring. This is what I want to do. That was a big thing for me. Number one thing I told them, I need mentors because I realized a lot of clinics don't want to mentor you. And the recruiters wanted me, but the vets there were like, oh no. And also too, don't go into it thinking like, oh, I'm gonna go to a clinic with a whole bunch of Black vets or a whole bunch of vets that either went to Tuskegee or LSU. Your comfort zone. Step out of that, because sometimes it is crabs in a barrel. And I went into it like, okay, I'm gonna apply to hospitals to where when I look at their staff, there are some Black vets, and some of them were like, hey, we don't want to mentor. And our counterparts were like, oh yeah, we're about mentoring. So you have to just be very confident in who you are and what you want, and you got to step out on that limb and be fearless with this. Like everyone makes mistakes. No one really knows like going in. We're all just kind of like figuring this out, and we're figuring out on a lot of aspects from the medicine to how we navigate it, and trying to navigate ourselves and balance everything. So you guys just definitely like know your worth and just really, really go for it. Like know who you are, know where you want to go, and force them to, kind of evolve around you. In your contract, say, hey, I can break this contract if I don't feel like I'm getting mentored. I want this. I need, I want to do orthopedics, and you said you would help me. I want to be doing surgeries. I want to get into, the endocrine disease. Like, let them know really like what you want, because that's going to take you to the next level of your career. And as me and Tierra were saying, and Dr. Pendergrass down there, everyone's just, it's we want to push this field to the next level. We want to be the people that is like the face of this conference, and the face of what we're doing in this field, so that they're looking at us like, oh, okay. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I've in the course of me finishing, you know they're always gonna look at you like you don't know what you're talking about until you start. Sometimes it's amazing how the receptionist makes it a point to just call me Morgan, and the other doctors correct her and I always say doctor. Like, it's so you sometimes you got to go above and beyond, but don't just focus on I'm Black and so it's going to be hard for me. Focus on I'm a veterinarian, I'm going to be great. That needs to be your main focus. I'm going to be amazing. I'm going to change the world. I'm going to change the field, and you guys will be fine.
Yeah. And know again that Black DVM Network is here to support like literally everyone. So Dr. Cornelius, I'm glad that you brought up the point about negotiation and knowing your worth. I think that we can definitely do a session on that. Anyone that knows me knows I'm about getting compensated. Time is money every single time. And so, you know, you're totally worth it. So I think that that's a good talk to have. And if there are other questions that you guys have, or even if Dr. Cornelius, Dr. Pendergrass, there are things that you're thinking, I wish I knew that, you know, we can definitely provide sessions on that for new veterinarians or vet students, et cetera. As a new grad, I am often asked, you know, I have a question for the vet, or they tell me I have a question for the vet. And I say, that's me. And they say, oh, okay. So, so, you know, it happens every time. But anyone else have any other questions, comments for Dr. Cornelius?
Yeah, I have a comment. So my day job, I'm a freelance medical writer, and I focus on pet owner education. So for me, like, I love what you're saying about it can't just be us and we're striving, like, we need to bring other people, you know, forward. For me, I see it as like part of my mission is to let other Black veterinarians know there's a world outside of private practice. Like, there's business ownership. Like, to me, that's huge. You know, being a business owner for about 4 years. So part of my goal is to say, you can do this too. Like, you can be a Black veterinarian, but that's not it. That doesn't have to be all that you do. You can also be a business owner and combine your business savvy with your veterinary training. So I feel very passionate about that.
That is a subtle plug, even though Dr. Pendergrass won't mention it.
Yes, it is.
For her topic rounds, which are happening in a couple weeks. I know that they're on the schedule. There's an event on Workplace, so definitely go to the website, RSVP for it. She's on Workplace, so you can ask her questions if you have them before her session. I think what she does is so cool. I cannot write to save my life, and so I'm glad that there are people like her out there that are doing that. And so she's going to talk more about that. And I think that even if it's not something that you would want to do full time, it's definitely something that you can like do a little side hustle with, right? And just make that extra cash, pay off your student loans, as opposed to all the other grads that are paying off their student loans, working 12-hour ER shifts after their full-time day job, right? Probably writing an article, if you can get that down to a science or down to an art, is a little bit easier than the ER shift. So, so definitely come to her rounds and hear her talk about that.
Yep, that's definitely true, because I do know some Black vets who do write on the side, so it's definitely possible.
Yeah. Other comments, questions, concerns? If not, we will let Dr. Cornelius get going. Thank you so much for that presentation. It was so good. I know that before, round of applause. How do I do this little reaction thing? Boom, I made it happen. We were talking before we started, and we were saying, he was talking about the program that he actually did to be able to see that case and do that research, and when he was in South Africa. And we didn't get a chance to really talk about that, but I'm sure you can always reach out to him and ask questions about that program, because he did it as a vet student. And so that might be of interest to other people. And then of course, this session is recorded. So if there's anything that you want to go back and watch, or you want to share it with a friend who's interested in Kudu, we'll have a link for that. Cool. Well, with that, thank you, Dr. Cornelius. Thank you guys for coming. Please let us know if you have any questions about anything, and we will see you next time. Next time. Bye, guys.